All right, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us again on this other episode of Guitar Trek, where we discuss everyone's guitar journey. You like that name, Guitar Trek?
Da, da, da. Yeah, you gotta have a
We'll see if I get sued. We'll see how long I can use it for.
You know, it's gonna be fine.
Yeah, exactly. So I'd like to welcome the infamous, the clairvoyant RJ, because I got to say, dude, you know, you must have had it in your mind that this was coming because you were a working musician for so many years, top of the hill. And then all of a sudden you decide, no, I'm going to start a YouTube channel, work from home. And then guess what? All tours are canceled. Everything's shut down. And you're living like a king.
It's pure luck. I swear to God, it's just pure luck. It's like, and basically I was tired of traveling, and YouTube was something that allowed me to stay at home and still, sort of make a living. But at the time I wasn't sure just yet. So, but it worked out.
That's fantastic. So now I'm still at the point where I'm not sure just yet, but I'm enjoying it. So it's cool.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Well, that's the most important part.
Yeah, exactly. Any way that we can sort of be involved with music and guitar, you know, and still kind of contribute to the guitar community, I find is worthwhile, right?
Exactly. I mean, that's probably why I'm in it. It's, being able to contribute to, players' journeys and also play with lots of gear. So it's like
It's perfect.
It's a win-win.
Absolutely. All right, so take me back, my friend. Let's get in our DeLorean, our magical DeLorean, and go back in time to little RJ. How old were you when you started to play?
I'm not exactly sure. I want to say I was around 9 or 10 years old. My dad was basically kind of a self-taught musician, but he had instruments all over the house. So we had a piano, we had guitars, we had, percussion and drums and everything. So he played all kinds of stuff. He sings and everything. But I probably got into guitar, from watching MTV and listening to the radio, probably around 9 years old. But with most people kind of in my age group or our age group, when the movie Back to the Future came out, that was like the defining moment for me to A, skateboard, and B, play guitar, which I still do to this day, both of them. So, Back to the Future was kind of like the catalyst of me really getting into guitar and asking to take guitar lessons and everything.
That's hilarious because I was thinking, never mind my strange random DeLorean reference, but I was thinking the other day, how did I get an interest in the guitar? Because I didn't have music around my house. Yeah, they were listening to music, but my parents weren't musical. Nobody in my family played an instrument. So I was thinking, I was exposed to Back to the Future and the Richie Valens movie and all that stuff was in and around that time when I was growing up, and it must have seeped in. So
yeah, I want to say like that period, 84 to like 87, there was so many movies, and I had this conversation, I think, on one of my live streams, but there were so many movies about guitar with guitar in it, or movies about bands.
Right,
and
like Eddie and the Cruisers and
the Cruisers, Howard the Duck. I mean, there's like everyone's playing guitar. There you go, Crossroads.
VHS.
That's right. You know what? I don't think I ever owned that on any kind of format.
I hunted it down after the fact.
Yeah. But yeah, it was just like, it was probably the best time to be growing up, because I hear a similar story among other guitar players who grew up around the same time. Was like, it was just that period of, MTV was just peaking, or not even peaking, just like going up, getting more popular and more popular. The movies, just pop culture in general, there's a lot of guitar happening.
And in the music, yeah, you're right. In general, everything on the radio had guitar in it in some form or fashion.
Exactly. So I think it was just, that was the luck of the draw that we grew up in that time period.
Yeah, I guess so. So, okay, so you're 9 or 10, you have music around the house. Your dad's a musician.
Mm-hmm.
What were you listening to in the house at that time?
Good question. So I remember being really into Michael Jackson, probably, Thriller era. I think I was 8 years old. So initially just pop music, whatever was on the radio, because we didn't get cable TV or an MTV until much later than everybody else. So I was just listening to Detroit radio, and it was all pop and rock, you know, Huey Lewis and the News and whatever was big around that time. But I feel like as soon as we got cable and MTV, and I was actually, you know, putting a visual to the music I was watching and seeing all these, you know, neon colored guitars or like BC Rich guitars and stuff, that was like super interesting. So like, I want to say, okay, so back to the Future thing. Because of that movie, I really got into 50s music. So Chuck Berry and Little Richard and all that Beach Boys stuff like that. So that was kind of like my first like type genre of music that I was heavily into. Because it wasn't.
You know what? Even as a young kid to dive sort of deep into that, that definitely exposed me to Chuck Berry too, and that whole road. But I didn't do like a deep dive into it. That's unique that you had.
That was, yeah, it was extremely deep. Like my cassettes that I would buy were mostly that style: Monkees, Beach Boys, Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, stuff like that.
The Monkees. I used to watch that. That was another thing that was music related that was on the TV when we were growing up.
Like on like Nickelodeon or something. Yeah, that was another show. Yeah, one of those early TV shows that had music all the time. And I mean, I could even talk about Hee Haw and like those you know, guitar was on TV. That was a big thing. But yeah, 50s music. At the same time listening to what was on the radio, but I really didn't get into guitar-centric music like rock and roll and blues or like, you know, that type of stuff until, I would say maybe like age 11 or something. And then I don't know how I got into Eric Clapton, but I think I probably magazines. That's what it was. So I would
magazines?
Guitar Player magazine, Guitar for the Practicing Musician, Guitar World. I would, you know, pick up these magazines and like, who is this guy? Robert Cray. Who's this guy? Eric Clapton, and just kind of like learn about, oh, these are people that are really good guitar players. So I probably first heard about, you know, players like that, and then I would seek them out. But at the same time, in the 80s, Clapton and Robert Cray were on MTV.
Oh yeah, everyone. Dire Straits, everybody.
Yeah, they were, you know, doing commercials, whatever. For I can't remember what Clapton did a commercial for, like Budweiser or something.
Well, Neil Young, ZZ Top, definitely.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of as soon as I got into Clapton and like you know, Cream and John Mayall and all that stuff, then my world expanded into everything guitar. That's where Zeppelin and Hendrix and old blues and everything expanded. But at the same time, and stop me if I'm talking too much, but at the same time, it was still late 80s. So Van Halen was coming onto the scene. And, ooh, here's this great, you know, virtuoso guitar player. Let me see what else is kind of like that. So that's when I discovered Steve Vai, Yngwie, Satriani. So I was kind of balancing these two loves of kind of like British blues or like, you know, 60s classic rock, and then like this new virtuoso guitar shred stuff. So those were my two main influences growing up.
Very cool. You know, I'm embarrassed to admit when you mentioned Van Halen. So I was very young, obviously, when Van Halen came around, and I didn't, you know, like, well, even mid '80s is sort of where they switched over from, you know, Van Halen to Van Hagar, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I discovered them right after that, and I would see these videos, some early Van Halen and some later Van Halen, and I was thinking, that singer, man, like, is that what happens when you get older? You're like, I don't. That doesn't make sense. I didn't know it was a different guy.
It's kind of funny. Like you just plop in a blonde guy vocalist, and it's like, even to this day, people will be like, oh, you know, like I have a buddy that sings for Great White, and I'm sure half of the people don't realize that that's not, you know, Jack Russell singing, whatever his name is.
Yeah, it's funny, man. Especially when you're a kid, you have no idea what's going on. All
Yeah.
right, cool. So when did you ever take, like lessons? Did your dad teach you? How did that start out?
I think initially I probably learned little things on my own. Um,
From magazines or by
no,
ear?
so this is a long time ago, but I remember my dad buying me some cheap kind of student guitar package from like Kmart or something, and it came with like a really little booklet with like, here's how to play a D chord, here's how to play a G chord. So it was probably maybe like 5 pages long, but I like learned single chord, and like Mary Had a Little Lamb thing from that little packet. I'm like, oh, this is great. I learned this all in a day or whatever. And I wanted to learn more. So I asked my dad to take guitar lessons, and there was like one music store in my town. So went there and signed up for just private lessons with some dude who played in like a local bar band, who was actually a bass player in that. So he wasn't even like, I mean, he played guitar, but he kind of taught me the basics. I worked from the Blue Mel Bay book, which is the very
Number one.
first one. Yeah, so basic beginner stuff. And then I can't remember how many years I took lessons with him for, but I remember learning the pentatonic scale, the blues scale from him, bar chords, um, and kind of some songs. And then that was it. And then I kind of stopped taking lessons after that and kind of just floated around and learned on my own by, picking up the tab from Guitar for the Practicing Musician magazine or whatever, or books, and just kind of learning solos that way, and eventually learning to transcribe by ear, just listening to my Walkman over and over again and records over and over again.
So would you do that in your formative years, around, 12, 14, 15, 16? Would you transcribe solos note for note and figure that out? Or were you more like, oh, I'll get the gist of the song, and maybe if there's like a hook in the solo, I'll learn that lick?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I can tell you the very first thing I learned from just my ear, was the intro to Black Magic Woman. So I remember that specifically. I was sitting on the couch. I had the cassette. I had my Walkman, and I would just like rewind, play until I got it. But also at the same time, it was a lot easier to buy tab books or buy the magazine. So I would kind of rely on that type of stuff. So I didn't learn single note stuff. I would learn the chords to songs by ear, which is still good ear training as well. But I really didn't have the skills to learn like an Eddie Van Halen solo or an Eric Clapton solo note for note, just by ear. And I had the tab books anyway, so that's how I learned. So it's kind of like I did a little bit of both, but at that time it was mostly just working off tabs.
Yeah. And were you learning those things from tabs, like from
Yeah.
beginning to end?
Well, so I would learn the parts, like some of the more intricate things. Like I remember um, Steve Vai's Attitude song was in one of the Guitar for the Practicing Musician things. And I remember looking at it, and there were so many like whammy bar markings and weird signs that I was like, I have no idea what this means. So I would learn like a bar of something that looked cool. And that's the thing. It's like you'd buy these magazines and you'd see the notes, and you're like, I have no idea what this sounds like or what the song is. So that would actually get me to go to the music store, the record store, and find these albums and buy them and listen to them. Because like that's kind of how I discovered Steve Vai. Was I saw some of the solos in the magazines, and I'm like, this looks like a lot of notes. I really want to hear what it sounds like. So I would go to the store and buy a cassette of like Flexible or whatever, and I'd listen to it, and I would listen to the album or the recording while reading the tab, so I knew what was happening. So that kind of helped too.
Yeah, that's very cool. It's funny. I remember at some point, I think I was shortly after I played, I started when I was 14. Well, okay, truthfully, I started when I was 9 for about a month and a half. And then I think my brother stepped through the guitar, which I left on the floor, and that just ended that until I was about 14. And then I decided I'm going to try this again. So I kind of picked it up on my own for a couple months. And then one of the teachers at my school, her husband taught guitar. So I went and had my mom give me a ride to his house and took a lesson from him. And he said, okay, these are some guitar players you should check out. Stevie Ray Vaughan and Steve Vai. I was like, I'm like, okay, Steve's easy to remember. And
Yeah.
then I checked out, I think it was Couldn't Stand the Weather was the first Stevie Ray Vaughan album. And I'm pretty sure it was Flexible from Steve Vai. And the Attitude song I remember like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
Completely polar opposite approaches to the guitar, but blown away by both of them. And it's funny that like, you know, how you get introduced to these people. And then of course, Passion and Warfare and all that stuff. And then the whole Stevie catalog, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's funny how one person says something or you read it in a magazine and then you go deep diving into back then. Now it's easy with the internet, but there'd be like an article in a magazine. Ooh, Steve I used to play with Frank Zappa. Who's this dude?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what happened, was just like you would learn about their history and where they came from. So you would start delving into that catalog or whatever. So yeah, I mean it's totally different nowadays, you know, with YouTube, and it's more and Instagram and everything. It's That's how people are discovering other musicians now.
and even with, you know, programs like Spotify and such for listening, people don't have like I used to like have a paper route and whatever and save money and buy an album, and I would have to make that decision, right? Where I'm
Yeah,
buying this album and I would only have two or three albums or maybe add one at a time, right? And you'd listen to it front to back again and again and again, and it would get in your ear to the
yeah,
point where, like you said, the first, you know, you remember learning the notes to was it Black Magic Woman? Yeah.
yeah.
So I remember a similar thing happened where I got really into the Allman Brothers, and I listened to Jessica, you know, again and again and again and again. And I was always intimidated by that type of thing to try to figure it out because there's just so many notes when you're just
Sure.
starting. But it's so melodic that you could sing it. So one day I was sitting on the couch, and without the music even playing, I just sort of started messing around and I figured it out just because it was playing in my head because I had listened to it again and again and again and again, right?
Yeah, that's kind of like the way I tell people to learn songs is before you even pick up a guitar, just listen to the song as many times as you can. Listen to it when you're going to sleep and everything, so you know exactly what it sounds like without having to access the actual recording, you know?
And that way you can also pick up on all the nuances and everything because every time you listen to it, it's a really deep, concentrated listen, not just in the background.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, the more you listen to something, the more you hear the intricate, like, you know, attacks or whatever. So you really get it ingrained in your head.
hmm So at what point did you start playing with other people? How old were you?
Pretty early on, actually. I think I was lucky because in my school, I went to a small school for like middle school, junior high. So there, I mean, there weren't a lot of kids. But in my grade, there was a friend of mine whose dad was also a guitar player. And they had a musical family. I think his older brother played the drums. So this is my friend Lawrence, who is like still my best friend to this day. Um, I can't remember how it happened, but I was already playing guitar. Um, and we were friends, and he said, "Oh, my dad plays guitar. You should, you know, come over or whatever." So I went over, and I can't remember who suggested he play the bass or learn to play the bass. I think they had like a cheap electric bass that his brother had or something. So he decided to learn to play the bass, and then we had another friend whose dad was also a musician, like in the '60s, but I can't remember, he might have been like a doctor or a lawyer or something. But he had, you know, a Gretsch. He had old like '60s gear, and then he had like a Ludwig drum set. So I'm like, okay, you're gonna play the drums. So he learned how to play the drums, and this was probably 10 or 11 years old. So my first band
Wow.
was that, you know, age. And I mean, we maybe learned like two or three songs, and we never learned how to finish them or anything. We just kind of learned the beginning and then the middle, and then we just kind of flubbed out after that.
But at
But
that age, that's amazing.
yeah, I mean, it was basically like very simple stuff. We didn't do any gigs or anything. It was just more just jamming in the basement. Um, And then I think 12 years old is when I started another band with my friend Lawrence with some upperclassmen. One guy was a drummer, the other guy thought he could sing, or yell.
Right.
So we actually learned a bunch of songs and played like a school dance and all that stuff. I think we might have, well, actually, we did a decent amount of like gigs. I think we probably did like 5 or 6 gigs while we were together. And then, everyone went to high school and we kind of broke up after that. But I mean, I was in a band from 12 years old through high school,
Wow.
different iterations, but it was always with my friend Lawrence that played bass.
Oh, that's fantastic to have that connection. I had a friend, Dave, who we would just sit in the park, both like two acoustic guitars and just jam on like Blue Sky or Dead or
Mhm.
Almonds tunes. And just that's how I learned how to solo, just by going back and forth on like 2 or 3 chord vamps and figure out, all the melodies within the pentatonic positions and everything else.
That's a good way to do it, is just get with another guitar player and just try to make music with, 2 guitars.
Yeah, no, exactly. So what you said your dad had some gear lying around, but what was your first guitar? Do you remember?
So the electric guitar that I learned on was my dad's, which was like a really cheap, crappy Kingston brand, which was a Japanese company, kind of like a Taisco type of guitar. I told this story to my friend the other day, but when my dad bought this guitar, probably in the 70s, um, he had a choice between a Gibson 335 and this guitar, which is also kind of like a double cut semi hollow body. But he chose the cheap one because it had a really crappy whammy bar, like a vibrato, like it was like a poor man's Bigsby type of thing.
He thought that was cool.
He liked the sound of it. So it's like, man, you passed up a 335. I mean, it would have been like a late 70s 335, but still.
Still very cool.
But anyways, this first guitar was so hard to learn on because I'm pretty sure the action was super high. We didn't know how to set up a guitar or whatever. And I remember my first guitar teacher probably mentioning like, you're going to need a new guitar. This is not playing, something like this is not playing well. And I'm like, okay, whatever. But it wasn't until maybe like a year of lessons that I got a Fender for my birthday, which I still have.
Let's see it.
Yeah.
For those watching.
I feel like everyone's had this guitar. This is a heavily modified of my guitar, but it's the same body and neck.
Dude, okay.
You have one, like, right?
You see it?
Yeah. That's awesome.
I got that later on. But yeah.
You got to have a blue Strat. This is like a 1986 Japanese Strat. And it had like this weird locking tremolo when I bought it. It was, I think it was called like the Series 1 trem. It was almost like a Kaler. So it had a locking nut thing and it had, a trem with like fine tuners. These pickups are something different, but it's essentially the same thing. Just the body and the neck really is what survived. But I just got it refretted and plecked and everything, so it's feeling like a brand new guitar.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So do you think it benefited you to learn on such a piece of crap with very high action?
It kind of did, because when I played that, it was like night and day. It was just like, oh my God, this plays like butter. And even then, it probably had high action. The Fender probably had high action back then too, but compared to what I was learning on, it was like, I mean, I was in love with this guitar when I got it. It was like, I would literally sleep with it in my bed. I would spend hours in my room. It definitely made a difference.
Okay, so that's hilarious. You see the black Strat hanging up there in the corner? All right, so sorry for the people that are listening to the podcast. Check it out on YouTube to see the pictures of the guitars. But so that was my first electric guitar. That was a Squier Strat. I don't know where it was made. It's actually like pressed plywood or something when you look inside. but it had a tone to it, and it still does. And I've swapped out the pickups and this and that and everything else throughout the years. I still have the original neck, though it's not on that guitar. But yeah, I used to sleep with that guitar because I would read in magazines, Hendrix always had his guitar on and around him and whatever, and he would sleep with it sometimes, and he would be cooking with it, and I'm like, all right, I'm doing the same thing through osmosis. It will come into my.
Yeah, it's kind of like, as if you can put your hands on the guitar throughout the day, then you'll get a feel for it, So I guess it helped.
Hey, it must have worked. You can play pretty damn well now. So
it works. Do that. Sleep with your guitar.
Everybody, sleep with your guitar. Hey, bring it everywhere. All right. So you were playing in bands all the way through, you said kind of junior high to high school, all that stuff.
Yeah. Nothing really
yeah,
original.
So were you playing gigs? Like were you out at bars, or were you doing like dances or
yeah, it was like
battle of the bands?
Exactly. We did some dances, kind of homecoming parties, talent shows, battle of the bands. We did like my mom's birthday party at a Chinese restaurant, which was funny.
That must have been interesting.
It was crazy. But we did actually, I think when we were seniors. So when I was a senior, I had a Jimi Hendrix tribute band. So, but it was it kind of morphed into something like we did some originals. So it was kind of like we did Hendrix covers, dressed like, the Experience. And we also.
So you were doing the afro?
Yeah. I had like a wig. I had bell bottoms, the whole thing.
That's amazing. And, do you have any pictures? I got to see that.
I do. I don't think I have them up on like my Facebook or Instagram. I got to find them though. They're crazy. But we did one gig at a club in downtown Detroit, opening up for a ska band that were our friends. And that was like the first time we ever played, like I had ever played an actual venue, with monitors and stuff. So, and that was it. Then after high school, we all went our separate ways to go to college and everything.
Were you singing in that band or just playing?
Yeah, I was singing, the Hendrix stuff and whatever. Not singing great.
No. I always tell people, they ask, do you sing? And I'm like, yeah, as long as I'm playing guitar loud enough to cover it up, I'm good to go.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way.
I gotcha. So did you find that while you were going through sort of those phases as like an adolescent, if you will, with a guitar in your hands, did you find that you would get stuck on a certain, thing or technique that you have to keep coming back to? Like, for some reason, I just can't get this. Or was it all fairly natural?
No, in fact, like I would, if I hit like a speed bump or something like that, I would just like forget about it and I'll come back to it later. So I never like learned to play fast when I was young, or you learned how to shred. I mean, I tried, but then I'm like, I don't know how to do this, so I'll do something else. And it really wasn't until my later adult years that I focused on technique and everything. But I mean, I never overworked myself to learn a certain solo or a certain technique. It was kind of like, I just want to have fun. So I'm not going to sit in my room and battle with this thing that maybe won't get, maybe I will get. But I just figured, if it comes to me, then cool. If not, whatever. But eventually, thankfully, a lot of that stuff came later when I was, more mature and somewhat schooled and more patient.
Mm-hmm. So when you were practicing, what did practicing look like for you? Was it just jamming along with tunes, or was it?
I mean, I would buy like books. Like I remember buying some Frank Gambale book. I can't remember if it was on sweep picking or
the red one, the sweep picking.
I can't remember. I know it was kind of red or orange.
Yeah, that's the
book or something.
I know I've got it here somewhere for sure.
But I would buy like kind of technique books or theory books or kind of like fusion things. And I never really got into it, or I would just kind of like start reading it and kind of going through the exercise and kind of get tired of them. I was more interested in like learning tabs and the actual notes of things. So like I remember buying like a jazz rock fusion solo book, and it was basically just like, you know, a cassette tape of some dude, I don't even know who it was, playing, you know, kind of jazzy 70s fusion solos with the tab, and I would just kind of learn certain licks from that.
So
I
for
never really learned a complete solo. It was always like, oh, that looks cool, let me learn that. Oh,
yeah,
that looks cool, let me learn that.
it's funny. We have a lot of similarities that way because I was the same. I would get really intrigued by, oh, like I would love to do that, or I'd hear like Frank and Bali or something and be like, oh wow, I'd buy the book and just be like, that's cool, but it looks too hard.
I think at my age, at the time, I think it was a little too over my head. Like I was buying like the, you know, the Mick Goodrick book, which was like some advanced stuff that I had to this day. I can't remember what it was, but um, yeah, I tried to learn on my own, but I actually did start taking jazz guitar lessons when I was 13.
13. Wow. So what
Yeah.
got you to jazz guitar at 13?
I can't remember. You know what? I think it was kind of like, you know, for that year or two that I wasn't taking guitar lessons and learning on my own, I was like, okay, I feel like I've learned enough on my own. I want to get guitar lessons again, but I don't want to go to some music store dude that's going to just teach me rock stuff or whatever. I want to learn something new. And I think I had the idea in my head that, oh, if you learn jazz, you can play anything. You know, that's a very common misconception, you know.
Right.
But I figured, you know, just learn jazz and then you can be like awesome or whatever. So I took private lessons. There was like an art school in downtown Detroit, but they did kind of private lessons on the weekends. So I studied with a teacher named Ron English, who still plays jazz guitar around Detroit right now, and he kind of taught me the basics of jazz. You know, major seven chords, minor seven chords. Um, I really can't remember if I learned proper improvisation from him. It was
So
hard.
sort of chord stuff and maybe some standards.
Yeah, I think he taught me like blues heads, like, you know, the Charlie Parker blues songs, Blues for Alice or whatever, Anthropology. But when it came time to improv over those, I didn't really have that theory just yet of so, you know, playing over the changes. I just kind of played a major scale here or a Mixolydian scale over the whole thing or something.
Right.
So it was very, very rudimentary stuff at the time. Um, and I think I probably stopped taking private lessons sometime in the middle of high school.
Okay. So like 16 or something like that, 15,
Yeah,
16.
15 or 16.
Okay. And then from that point on, after high school, what was your musical journey? Did you know during high school you're thinking, I want to do this, I want to study it, I want to like go and be a pro musician, or were you on a different path?
Well, so when I had graduated high school, I really had no idea what I wanted to study in college. So the first year of college, I just went to a general liberal arts school and just to get my feet wet in the college experience. So I wasn't majoring in anything. I was just taking classes, doing, you know, having fun or whatever. And then it kind of hit me midway through that year that I think I wanted to go to school for something related to music. So I was going to school in northern Florida in St. Augustine, and I had actually heard, I think a year before, probably when I was in high school, I heard about, you know, music schools, and I heard that the University of Miami down in South Florida was a really nice music school. So I checked them out. I saw what, you know, programs they offered, and they were offering like a music engineering degree. So I'm like, okay, that sounds cool. And that would make my parents a little bit happy because it's engineering.
That's
So, and my idea, I thought it was like, oh, you could, you know, this will get you in the studio. You get to work on the mixing board and play around with microphones and stuff. You know, this is like the '90s, mid '90s or whatever. And so I went down to check out the campus. And then I actually had to go back because you had to audition as a guitar instrumentalist. If you were going to apply to the music school, you still had to take, guitar instrument lessons, even if you were just studying the engineering stuff. So I had to audition with like jazz songs. I'm like, that's weird. I just want to do the engineering thing. But
Want to use faders and push buttons.
yeah, I mean, you didn't have to like be great apparently, but I still had to audition, and that kind of like freaked me out. But I did it. I got accepted. I went to the music engineering program for my, I guess technically my second year of college. And midway through that, I was, I had all these expectations of doing a bunch of studio stuff, which, there was some cool studio classes that I got to do, but a lot of it was heavy into science and math and like acoustical engineering, like basically the more of the engineering, like nerdier side, like designing whatever acoustic yeah, I don't even know, basically stuff that I wasn't interested in.
Right.
And I was kind of jealous of my friends that were in the jazz program, the jazz guitar program, because they were doing all the cool things. They were doing all the cool classes and ensembles, and basically I figured that's what I wanted to do. So, I told my parents, and I told my my teaching assistant, not teaching, like a counselor or whatever, that I wanted to change my major to studio music and jazz is the actual degree name. So I had to re-audition, which is weird. So I did a lot of auditioning, and so I got accepted into the jazz program, and I did another 3 years, I guess, of that.
So what was that experience like for those that are thinking about maybe going and studying music?
It was awesome because that was really what I wanted to learn. So I think it's important that you have to have that desire to learn these things, and they, at the time, the curriculum was, a lot of stuff that some people don't want to learn. Like I had to learn all about the history of music, musicology, some classical stuff. But it was all offset by the cooler jazz classes that I was taking, theory, or like, the history of jazz music, and my private lessons and different ensembles that you're playing in. So, it was great because I played guitar every day, and, the fact that you could go to college and get a degree for playing guitar, at the time was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of my high school friends were like jealous, or just kind of like, really? You're just playing guitar and taking all these classes? But it is a scary thing, because what's a music degree going to do?
Unless you're going to teach, then obviously you have a path. But yeah, absolutely. I know. I went to study. I went to business school after thinking I'm going to be the smart, responsible one. But the business school I decided to go to was quite far from where I lived, and I traveled like 2 hours there and back every day, just because they were actually known for the music school.
Oh.
And I wanted to be around the music school, even though I was studying business, but I was too afraid to audition. Yeah. Anyway, I wound up, due to several different reasons, not going to there for music. But a couple of years later, I went to the university for the jazz performance program. And I auditioned, I got in, it was great. Unfortunately, that was the year that the faculty decided to go on strike for several months after like a month and a half of being in there. But the month and a half was great. The one problem was they weren't doing private lessons, and they expected you to do private lessons, sort of paying and going outside of it. Was the strangest thing, just for the jazz program. For like the classical program, they had private lessons, or if you were in the piano track. But guitar, they didn't have it at the time. Now I believe they do. It was so strange. Do you know who Lauren Lofsky is?
I don't.
Okay, amazing jazz player. Played with Oscar Peterson and a bunch of guys. But he eventually became, I think, the chair of the guitar sort of jazz program.
Cool.
But that was after I left. So I was like, I'm not even getting private lessons. I'm in an ensemble, which is cool. But and then they're on strike for several months, and I'm sitting there on my butt doing nothing. So I just sort of moved on. Yeah, it was an unfortunate experience for me. But the great thing about going to school is you're around other people that have that passion. And that's that time in your life where you're just, like you said, you've got a guitar in your hands all the time and, or whatever your music, your instrument of choice is. And you're kind of jamming with everybody and making those connections, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the most important part of that experience was, you know, being so absorbed into that scene with, different musicians and constantly like even when we weren't in class, someone would be like, "Hey, you want to jam in the practice room, during lunch or something?" So it was constant, just like, music um, influence everywhere. And, there were guys that were there heavily into jazz. Some were heavily into like rock, um, or, different aspects of jazz. There's like, avant-garde people and like swing, bebop people and everything. So you got a mix of influences from your peers. But to this day, I tell people like the best part of going to music school was the connections that I made, because I'm still friends with a lot of my classmates, and you know some of them have hired me for gigs and stuff. So that was worth the tuition, just having the networking aspect.
So let's talk about that now. So you've gone through the program 3 years later. Do you feel that you're a better musician because of it?
Yeah, I really do feel like that first year that I was in this jazz program, I became a better guitar player because I learned so much in so little time. Um, I kind of learned the keys to the type of soloing that I wanted to do. So it's very like an aha type of moment. So that very first year was very, very big for me. And then like, towards senior year, it's funny. I wouldn't say I was worried about what I was going to do when I got out, but I was playing around with the idea like I had entered the program because I kind of wanted to be a studio musician. This was like was it mid to late 90s now? So um, I was thinking like, okay, where can you be a studio musician around this time? So you could either go, I guess at the time, New York was still a place to be a studio guy, LA, and then there's a place called Nashville. So I got into, that 90s country, rate pop country, which was, huge. That was kind of like, right after Garth Brooks, Shania Twain was big.
Is that from the Dan Huff era
Yeah,
of
exactly.
Nashville?
It was like, whoa, this dude Dan Huff is doing all the country records. I knew him from Giant and all this stuff. So I was getting into Brent Mason and Dan Huff and really getting into the production of what was happening in Nashville. I even came here. So I live in Nashville. People are wondering. Right now, I live in Nashville. But at the time, I had visited Nashville during my spring break by myself. And I was so like turned off by it. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was just where I was going or where I was hanging out. It's definitely not what it is today. But I went there I went to Nashville, thinking maybe I'll move here after I graduate. Decided not to move here after graduation. So, and it's funny, years later, I obviously live here now, but I kind of shifted what my plan was throughout the years.
Okay, so how did it shift? Where did you? Well, I know how it ended up because I know you, but for those that
So,
don't,
yeah, after graduation, I kind of, like most graduates, was floating around doing odd jobs because it's not like, you get a certain degree and you can actually have a job right out of college. It's, having a music degree, you either go get out of college and play in a cover band or something or teach, or go back to school and get your master's and go back to school and get your doctorate and all that stuff and then become a teacher. But I probably, so I graduated in 99 and I probably just worked, a regular day job for a year, maybe 2 years. And then I got into, I had met some new people through friends from school. And
This is still in Florida?
yeah, I'm still in Miami, South Florida. And I, I think I eventually fell into the cover band thing, playing at local clubs and playing like R&B covers and sometimes the occasional wedding band or whatever. So luckily at the time, South Florida was a haven for cover band music. There were so many places and so many clubs to play and make, a decent amount of money at the time. So that was kind of like my main gig. I was playing clubs all the way from, Miami Beach all the way up to like West Palm Beach and every week, every weekend. So it was, a good couple of years of doing that.
You know
Uh,
that I noticed that when I around the time when I met you, when I came down with Sammy and played a couple of those festivals,
mhm.
it was a really happening scene down there. There were like live music. There were live music venues all over the place, and people would actually show. I guess because it's a college town, right? And people would kind of
Well, sort of, but it's also, there's the tourism,
right.
not just in Miami, but like Fort Lauderdale, which is in the next town over. That's like a whole different county, different city. They've got a lot of tourism. Then you go up north to West Palm Beach. That's a whole nother county as well. That they have tourism. So you got this like tri-county Chitlin circuit, I guess. Kind of going, working that whole circuit. So yeah, I put a lot of miles on my car just driving to these gigs and stuff. But yeah, I think nowadays it's probably not as prevalent. Although I still have a lot of friends that were gigging, a lot. I mean, our friend Wani and um, Sam was gigging too. So um, I did that for many years, and eventually I caught the ear of a reggae band, or actually the drummer of a reggae band came to one of the gigs I was doing. Um, and they were looking, his reggae band was looking for a guitar player to tour. And this reggae band was called Inner Circle, and they're kind of known for the theme song from Cops. They've had some other hits like in the '90s and stuff. So I was the touring guitar. That was like my first touring gig. This would have been maybe 2002, I think is
Okay.
when,
So were you touring just within Florida or throughout the states or where?
pretty much worldwide. So I mean, the first tour I ever did was a summer tour with them, and it was mostly up the East Coast. So all the way to Maine, through Florida. um, but then we went to Brazil, we went to Hawaii, we did all over the continental US. We went to Germany. So it was kind of like, my first experience, touring the world.
So I love asking people when they tell me about their first touring experience because we all have this image in our minds growing up, being of the MTV generation, if you will, thinking what it's going to be like watching these crazy videos of Van Halen partying or whatever. What was the reality of touring versus what you had in your head? What was it like for you in your experience?
Well, I mean, in that situation, it was kind of a a different situation than being like in a rock band or something. So
Right.
these were these older Jamaican gentlemen that have, I mean, I want to say they've been there, done that, but actually they were, I don't think, they did drugs or anything. They, maybe one of them had a glass of wine once in a while, but for the most part, they were very healthy on the road. Um, there was no debauchery whatsoever. And then here I am, this like 20 something Filipino guy that's on his first tour. So,
Full of hormones and ready to rock.
but I was like, I mean, I was pretty tame considering the situation. And, they probably helped me just maintain, you know, my composure and stay normal. So I never partied. I never, cause who am I going to party with? Nobody.
And what about the day to day of it? What was that like?
Um, That's a long time ago. I can't remember. Well, it was my first time, doing an extended tour on a bus. So I, I feel like we did most of our drives during the day, which a lot of times now, a lot of bands will drive overnight, through the night. They'll sleep after the gig or whatever. But I feel like on that tour, we would do a show and then we would actually sleep in a hotel and then drive that morning to the next venue, next city, which was probably had to be at least, less than a 5 hour drive or something.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really cool because, we'd have days off in certain places. So I would be able to like hang out and see new cities or whatever, or actually visit some friends that were in those cities. So I got to see friends from college that I hadn't seen in years because I
Well,
was in the city that they were in or whatever.
so after that tour, you'd done like an East Coast thing, and you'd gone a little bit all over the world. Did you feel like you had the chops from being on tour? Like everyone talks about what is it, touring fingers or touring chops, like because you're playing all the time.
Yeah. I mean, at the time I didn't realize it, but I definitely learned how to be a sideman guitarist, how to learn the songs, how to play with other musicians, how to not be in the spotlight, kind of be the guy in the back just holding it down.
So
Uh,
I did an interview with I don't know if you know Chris Cadell. So Chris is now with Ian in Thornley in Big Wreck,
oh, cool.
and he plays with some Canadian artists like Colin James and Sass Jordan. Great guitar player, great guy. Anyway, he was talking about the idea of having to learn exactly that because as guitar players, especially when we're growing up, we learn these cool things and we want to be like, hey, look at what I can do. Hey, look at what I can do. But you have to develop that maturity to be able to say, okay, I'm here to serve the song, and especially in the sideman role, I'm here to serve this artist or this band. So I got to learn how to sit in the pocket and really know my role, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. You have to learn how to be humble and, you're not going to play guitar solo every song. You have to learn how to be a good rhythm guitar player, basically, you know? Even though everyone has dreams of being, Steve Vai or whatever, in
With the fan
reality,
blowing our hair.
yeah, in reality, you just have to learn how to be Corey Wong or, just be a really good rhythm guitar player.
Yeah, solid timing, sit in the pocket, play with others well, like you said, and serve the song and tones and stuff in gear. Did you learn, you know, were you always big into tone and gear, or was that something that came through touring and learning on the road?
Well, you tell me. This was my pedal board. This was basically my rig when I was touring with Inner Circle that first summer. It was every single line six. What was it called? Those big four button pedals.
Like the DL4 and then the modulation one and the yellow distortion one.
It was the yellow one. It was the blue one. It was the purple one, and it was the green one. That
I
was
think
it.
that was all of them. No, there was a red one too,
It
wasn't
was
there?
a red one, yeah, which was I can't remember what that was like, but and a wah wah pedal and a tuner going through a Roland 120 JC 120 Jazz Course 120 solid state.
Amazing.
That was it.
Was that your amp?
No, it was theirs. That was theirs because they had the case for it and whatever. So that was the back line that I was using for like pretty much every single gig in the States with them.
Yeah, at least it was consistent, right?
I mean, it's at the time it sounded great, but you know, prior to that, I had like a very shoddy pedal board setup. I didn't really know anything about pedals or whatever until those Line 6 pedals came through. What are they called?
I don't remember.
Modeler pedals, right?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, the great thing about those pedals or any multi-effects pedal, like my first multi-effects pedal was I actually just bought it again because I loved it, the simplicity of it so much. It's Boss ME50, where you just literally turn the knobs. It's so analog that you could just like, so easy. But you have the option to change that main dial to if you want to do trem, if you want to do flange or phaser. And it's a great way to learn about and get an introduction to all the different effects.
Yeah, that was kind of the draw for me to the Line 6 stuff because it was like well, I can't afford to buy all these amps, so I'll buy a pod, or I can't afford to buy all these distortion pedals, so I'll get, the distortion modeler. So I'll at least know what, you know, a fuzz space sounds like or something. So it was, the cheaper route to get as many tones as possible.
Sure. And that delay pedal is still a staple on a lot of people's boards.
Yeah, even the modulation pedal. I have a friend that had the modulation modeler. I think it was modded by somebody, but it still sounded killer.
And there's a lot of keyboard players that play with that stuff too. Like I remember the guy from Government Mule had a couple of those on his keyboard rig that he was going
Yeah,
for.
I mean that Leslie. I remember the Leslie sound in the blue pedal. It sounded really good to me.
Yeah. So okay, cool. So you had the Line 6 gear, rocking that, and and the Roland.
Uh-huh.
Uh, so what was the graduation into tone? What got you to really deep dive into that?
I think it was shortly after that. I'm trying to remember. It was probably around that same time because, like, while I was doing these tours with Inner Circle, I mean, obviously we weren't touring the whole year. So when I would be home, I would still be playing these local bar band gigs or club gigs and weddings. So this would have been, 2003-ish or whatever. And I think that's when I started getting into like boutique pedals, like full tone, exotic. I think I got a Zen drive around that time. And that's when I started discovering all these nuances of these, overdrive pedals and whatnot. I mean, it was mostly overdrive stuff that I was into. I was basically just using whatever delay pedal, like a Boss DD6 or something. And, not so much modulation stuff. So I feel like after that, I can't really remember some of the pedals. Okay, I remember, I think it was a Barber Electronics LTD overdrive was my go-to overdrive for the longest time. I probably had like a TS9 Tube Screamer, and those Line 6 pedals. But over the years, I would buy pedals now and then. And it wasn't really until I started doing gear demos that I got more and more into pedals, only because I had to, really,
Mm-hmm.
stay on top of all that stuff, of the industry.
So even in cover bands, when you were doing the South Florida cover band thing, how were you getting the tones through the Line 6 stuff?
So yeah, I mean, it varied. It changed over the years. I remember I did buy like a Line 6 flex tone amp, and then I sold it because I hated it. And then I got those modeler pedals, and then, gosh, I think, yeah, it's just kind of like a mixture of those Line 6 pedals and whatever boutique overdrive maybe that I would get. I remember Radial Tone Bone. I had that for a while.
Boys, I think.
What's that? Yeah, Canadian guys, yeah. An exotic AC booster. I remember using that a lot. I can't remember what else. And some just weird distortion pedals that some people would recommend to me or something.
See, I remember being down in Florida one year, playing one of those gigs at the festivals, and Sammy took me to I think it was called MAE. Is that the name?
Yeah.
Of it? Okay.
The best
And
store.
there was one cool, like in the back room, they had like James Tyler Strats and Sirs, and they even had like a crazy Pat Martino model. They had some high end stuff. It was really cool to be there.
Yeah, I spent a lot of money at that store.
Oh man, it was great. It was beautiful. But I remember there was Dr. Z, I think Route 66 head or something. I'd never plugged into a Dr. Z, plugged into that, and it was just like, wow. And then they had full tone OCD, like the first version of it. And I plugged into that, and they talk about, transparent overdrives and stuff. I'd never heard anything like that. All I knew was sort of Tube Screamer stuff, right? I plugged into that, and I was just like, okay, this is coming home with me right away. And then they were like, yeah, there's this guy coming in tomorrow who's making this pedal that like Robin Ford's using and stuff. And it's the Zen Drive,
Alfonso.
So, yeah, so he came by, and it was kind of cool. It was a really cool little store.
Yeah, I mean, that was my favorite store, and I still have gear to this day that I've bought from it. Like one of my main gigging amps around that time was a blackface Fender Bassman head that I bought there for $300, which I still have to this day,
Amazing.
and I still use it for on sessions and in my videos. So, but yeah, I've bought and returned lots of gear. They knew, I mean, everyone knew me. Um, yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, you get into the gas and the guitaritis and stuff, and you just sort of like,
Yeah, I want to say around that time, mid 2000s is when I put a lot of gear on my credit cards and bought a lot of stuff just to kind of try out stuff. Hearing about like this new boutique amp or these new, boutique pedals or whatever.
Well, it
I
makes
just
sense because that was also the time when YouTube sort of started, and you'd see like Alan Hines demoing the AC booster or the AC thing,
yeah,
and BB and this and that, or and you're like, oh wow, that sounds cool, and he sounds great. Let me check it out.
exactly. Like 2005, 2006, just exactly. That's when I started probably looking into YouTube and checking it out and seeing all these gear demos, and that's making me buy things. Now the tables have turned.
Exactly, exactly. So let's go back to your journey after that reggae band. You've played with some fairly high profile artists. How did that come about?
Yeah, kind of. That first touring thing kind of was a stepping stone to other things. So Inner Circle actually owns a really nice recording studio in North Miami called Circle House Studios, and they would actually call me to come and play on records that producers would be there working on stuff, so they would ask me to come and just hang out if they needed guitar tracks or whatever. So I played on a Tupac Shakur record when I was there.
Very cool.
I think I did some demo work. It was mostly hip hop and R&B and some reggae stuff. So that's how I have like all these credits with like R&B artists and whatnot, because just being at the studio. So it was great. It was a good time. Just being able to tour and getting into the studio work, which is kind of what I wanted to do out of college. So I was finally getting to do it. Also, out of the blue, around that same time, I got called to do a session for a Santana record because the first and the second call guitar players weren't available. So I was like the third string, So I got that call. I had no idea what I was getting into, but it turned out to be like the first single from this album. I think it was called Shaman, which came out in 2004. Excuse me. But it was really cool because as far as I knew, it was just kind of like a demo thing, but it turned into be the master session. And then I remember getting the CD and looking at just so I could see, my credits or whatever. And like Tim Pierce was listed on there and like Lee Sklar. And then my name, which only I said, just put my first name. I want to be known as just RJ. For some reason, I thought it was, as a joke, but also just like, maybe, yeah, I'll just go by my first name.
Like Madonna.
Exactly. Or Cher. So it's just like Tim Pierce, Lee Sklar, RJ. I'm like, oh God. To this day, that's like one thing I totally regret is not using my last name. But like those early recording sessions, I just went by RJ. So that if you look at the credits listing, it just doesn't have my last name. So that was kind of like my very first big session was that Santana record. And I don't know, I feel like around this time, everything was just going up and up. Like I was doing a bunch of sessions. I started getting other touring work. I was touring with this Colombian singer named Soraya, who actually our friend Wani was playing drums with. So
oh, cool.
Got to play together. And eventually that turned into getting the gig with Ricky Martin because the musical director for Soraya became the musical director for Ricky Martin. So we were good friends. And he had told me like, down the line, I'm going to need you to do the Ricky gig. So actually there was one tour that I was hoping to do that I never got called for because they didn't need a second guitar player. So I was like kind of heartbroken because like I was like, I thought you were gonna call me for the Ricky tour. And like they only needed him to play guitar. He's another guitar player. Um, so I had to wait till the second tour, which was 2000 and gosh, 2006 was the first gig I did with Ricky Martin, which I got called to do the MTV. It was an MTV Unplugged, recording. So it was like a DVD or a broadcast thing, and then an actual album. So, and that turned into doing the tour. So,
And how long were you on tour with Ricky?
um, I did one world tour with him, which was 2007, which was that whole year, basically, January to November, maybe.
And that's a huge machine at that point. That is the music business machine.
Yeah, that to this day is the biggest tour production wise that I have ever been on. I think there was like 66 crew or something like that. I can't remember, but what did we have? 4 semi trucks, 6 tour buses, something like that. All around the world. There was 3 different stage setups. There was like an A stage, a B stage, a C stage in different continents. So it was definitely the highlight of my touring career for sure.
And so what was that experience like in terms of, choreography, if any, hitting your marks, playing with in-ears on such I'm assuming in-ears on such a large stage. And I think you were playing direct, I think you told me.
Line 6 Veta head, Line 6 HD Veta.
So talk about that a little bit, because that's very different from playing on stage.
Oh yeah. So one of the first things that hit me was when I first got to the first day of rehearsals in early January. I was unloading my gear from my truck, and people were the production people were running out to me saying, no, don't touch the amps. I'm like, why? It's like, because if you get hurt, then it's not good, because then I had to learn to just be a guitar player. I was given a guitar tech just for me that would handle everything. And that was like totally new. I didn't have to change strings. I didn't have to tune. I didn't have to carry gear, set up gear. So it was cool because all I had to do, show up the sound check. He hands me the guitar, we play, boom, same thing on gig, showtime, and whatever. I didn't have to pack up anything. It was like a dream come true. But how it worked was basically the whole month of January was rehearsal time. So I feel like the first 2 weeks was just band rehearsals. Maybe the first week was just band, and the second week we had Ricky singing. And then the last 2 weeks, that was like the staging rehearsals. So the dancers and the lighting and the band got together and figured out, there was, I forget what the term is, but they're like choreographers for the band, kind of like staging. For certain songs, we had to be in a certain part of the stage.
Right.
Sometimes we had to throw in a little dance move and all this stuff. And so we had to do that for like 2 weeks. But at the same time, another thing that I had to learn was wardrobe changes. That was the one thing that scared me about that whole tour, was the wardrobe change. We had to, I think it was only one change, but it happened in this part of the show. Like the whole show is totally time coded, and like everything is on a click. Right. So it worked exactly, every show is exactly the same pretty much. And
were you guys playing with tracks as well?
Yeah. I can't remember what they were running, like Motu or something, or it wasn't like Pro Tools or Ableton. It was Digital Performer. That's what they were using.
Okay.
And I forget how many minutes we had for this wardrobe change. It was like a really short amount. It was like 2.5 minutes to change clothes, completely clothes, shoes, shirt, everything. And you'd see the whole band like just like freaking out and running to like the dressing tent and just like throwing on stuff. And like in rehearsals, it worked fine, but there were many times on the gig where like some guy would be like, "Where's my shoes? Where's my shoes?" And it was more intense for me because me and the other guitar player, the MD, we were the first people that had to be on stage for the next number. So we were pressed for time to be on the stage. So that was probably the hardest part of the gig was changing was changing clothes.
But truthfully, I mean, you're sweaty, you're running around in the dark looking for stuff. Yeah, I
Yeah.
can imagine, adding to the pressure of everything else and remembering your parts and all that stuff. Yeah, and the choreography and your marks changing.
Yeah. I mean, really, once you've rehearsed it for so long and you've gotten the first couple gigs out, it's like it's like cake. It actually got boring after a while, just doing the same thing. So,
And that's what I wanted to ask you because it is such a choreographed musically. I mean, like everything is to the clock. What is it like compared to another gig where you can stretch out a little bit? What do you prefer?
well, I think musically I mean, frankly, it was kind of boring after a while because, it's not a very guitar centric genre, which is fine. But the thing that really made it exciting was the excitement of playing at these venues, the excitement of the crowd, and kind of the enormousness of it, of the whole spectacle.
Right.
Um, so that kind of made up for, the lack of excitement musically. But yeah, I would say, towards the end of most tours, I kind of get tired of playing the same things over and over and again.
Yeah, which is understandable. Most people do anyway. So that's pretty common. So after that ran its course, then you wait a second. I'm just thinking you moved to LA before you stopped playing with Ricky, right? Or was that
Sorta. I mean, I moved pretty much right after that tour.
okay?
So I moved to LA in 2008.
So what took you to LA?
Um, I kind of. It's funny now that I think about it. There was multiple things that occurred in Florida that sparked my interest of moving to LA, and it was basically people coming up to me at shows and being like, "What are you doing here? You should be in LA or New York or something." I remember specifically 2 times that happened, and it was like, okay, I think that's a sign that I should look into going to LA. So I had been to LA a couple times for like the NAMM show and on tour and everything, so I knew a little bit about the city, and I knew friends there, and at the time, I believe I had actually my guitar tech from the Ricky tour, who's a really good friend of mine, and he's actually John Mayer's guitar tech now.
Oh, cool.
Uh, Previously, he was
Good
Jeff
feeling for him.
Buck's guitar. So, a disclaimer: Jeremy Nielsen is world's greatest guitar tech. Has tech for Jeff Beck and John Mayer, but I had him first. So, yeah. So he actually moved out to LA before me, and I think I actually had 2 other friends that moved out that same year from Florida to LA. So I'm like, man, everyone's going to LA. I think it's the greatest time to go to LA right now. So, yeah, I moved to LA, and I still kind of had the Ricky gig, but he wasn't doing anything. I think when I lived in LA, we did maybe a handful of just kind of private shows,
The corporate thing.
So yeah, I think actually they were all in Mexico.
Okay.
And then eventually it kind of got fizzled out. I mean, I wouldn't say I was fired from the gig, but it was like, I think at the time he just had kids and, was not putting out a record, not touring. So it was kind of like the whole band kind of just left or whatever. So I was out in LA. And I kind of left South Florida because I wanted to get away from the whole Latin touring thing. I wanted to get away from, the reggae and the hip hop and all that stuff. And I wanted to basically get like on a pop tour or rock band thing. Um,
And you had a very unique look at the time, and obviously you had the chops.
yeah, I think, yeah, I kind of prepared myself for the LA thing. And I had moved when I had moved, I definitely didn't feel like I was a fish out of water. I kind of felt confident of, my contacts that were in town. I knew where to go. I knew how LA worked, sort of, for the most part. So it wasn't like I was totally brand new, kind of green, moving to LA. But it didn't.
Wasn't your hair green at the time? At one point, your hair was green. I remember that.
Green. It's been red.
Oh, red. Maybe it was red.
Blonde. Yeah, that was early. That was before the touring, I think. Actually, I can't remember when it was red. I don't know. It was before the Ricky stuff. Yeah, I had red hair.
Okay. I don't know why it sticks out of my head, but I had the wrong color in my head. So there you go. That's what happens when you get old. All right. Sorry. Continue. LA.
So LA actually kind of didn't turn out to be what I expected, early on. I actually had to get a day job just to survive, just to pay rent, because LA is a very expensive city to live in. And I wasn't gigging, I wasn't touring, but I I got a day job, kind of working in an office, and I was actually playing with like a just a local rock band for fun. And it was a lot of fun because it was kind of what I was into. I remember answering the ad. There's a band called the Chelsea Smiles, and I answered the ad in Craigslist, and basically they were looking for someone that was into Kiss, MC5, and the Stooges. And at the time, I that's what I was into, so it worked out perfectly. And the whole look was like kind of Ramones-ish, where we're all wearing black leather jackets and black everything, kind of that long, shaggy,
Right.
70s or whatever. So that was a lot of fun. And through that, I met a ton of, great people. I got to play, the venues on the Sunset Strip and everything. So it was a good time. And like I said before, it's kind of like it's all in your connections, all in who you meet. And through that band, I met my now wife. I got to work as a guitar tech for basically like Tim Pierce. So I had one of the odd jobs that I was doing to survive in LA was I would be like a guitar tech in the studio for a producer named Rob Cavallo. Now Rob Cavallo's did the Green Day Dookie record. He's done, Dave Matthews. He's done a bunch of great bands and stuff. So he had a studio in his house, and he would do, the sessions there. And I would go there and kind of be on call to tune guitars or get amps out of the back room and plug them in and stuff. So on those sessions, a lot of times it was Tim Pierce, who's a famous studio guitar guy, playing on some of those records. And that's how I met him. And it's funny because I remember telling him the story. I tell him this story all the time, every time I see him. But I told him the story about that Santana record. Like, that was my first session, and it was so cool to see my name next to your name and everything. And yeah, I've told him that story many times. Now him and I are like really good friends. I've been to his house multiple times, and he's on my phone and we text now and then. So it's kind of surreal that turned out that way. But yeah, I mean, it's all in who you meet and just kind of meeting all these people. But I never got like that big pop tour out of LA. Even though I did auditions and I did random stuff. I played with Stevie Wonder for a short-lived show that Brian McKnight, the R&B singer, had, which I never got paid for, but that's okay because I got to play with Stevie Wonder. So I did a bunch of random gigs when I was in LA. I mean, literally the most random, crappy things and like the coolest things.
Well, isn't it very much a pay to play kind of place when you're in LA for original stuff, unless you're a huge act?
It's yeah, but it's also kind of who you know. Like I feel when I was in the original rock band, they were so dialed into the clubs on the strip that it wasn't a pay to play situation. So people might be wondering what the deal is with pay to play. I actually had like a solo one man band blues thing that I was doing in town, and one of the gigs that I did was, I guess, a pay to play situation. Which what they do is the promoter sells you a bundle of tickets for a set amount of money, and it's up to you to sell those tickets, and you can sell it for obviously higher price to get your money back. So that's what they mean by pay to play. It's like, here, I'm going to give you 50 tickets for whatever, $200, and you can sell those tickets for whatever price you want. And if you sell all of them, obviously you can make your money back and then some. So it's that's kind of the scam thing that they do.
Right.
But it's funny. I got offered that gig and I said nope, and the promoter said, like, okay, you don't have to do that. Just come and play.
You kind of have to know. You got to have the street smarts.
Yeah, you can't be a yes man all the time.
Yeah, I remember that you had that sort of that rig set up with like it was like a kick drum thing and a snare or something.
Yeah, it was quite an intricate setup.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine doing something like that. I mean, you're constantly like your brain is split into like 8 pieces.
I did one gig with the one that was a stand-up kind of backpack rig. I couldn't do it again. It was too hard. I mean, it's a more.
It's got to be an issue too.
Oh God, yeah. It was such a workout. Just carrying it, much less playing it.
Mm-hmm. And then I remember you. So you mentioned that you met your now wife while you were playing down in LA. I remember, wasn't it like one of your first dates or something in and around NAMM when I was there like 10 years ago? Was like House of Blues?
Or was it the year after that I met you? I think. Wait, did you go to see the Rat concert with Sam?
Yes.
So yeah, that was our first date. Exactly.
There you go. I remember that. I remember.
Yes, our first date was the Rat concert at the House of Blues, the Saturday of the NAMM weekend. That would have been 2010.
Yeah, right around there.
Oh,
yeah. NAMM is a wild experience for those who haven't been. I mean, I haven't been since, so it's been quite a while since I've been there. But back then, wow, it was a wild experience for sure.
Yeah, it's huge now.
A big. Who knows if they're even going to have it this year?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, January is going to probably creep up sooner than we think. So
yeah, definitely. Wow. All right, so LA, not quite what you expected, other than the the magic of meeting your wife, which has definitely made it worth it. Then you decided from LA, yeah, maybe I'll give Nashville a shot. What brought that about?
So, I was living in LA and I did, some touring, some high profile stuff, but at the same time, it wasn't what I wanted. LA was getting a little unaffordable now. And my wife and I were both kind of tired of the rat race, all the traffic and the cost of living and everything. So we were actually planning on moving back to the Midwest. Her and I are both from Michigan. And we had decided to move to Chicago. We wanted to be back in the Midwest because we have, a lot of friends and family around. And she had lived in Chicago previously. I know Chicago's a great town. I had family and friends that lived there. So we had decided to move to Chicago at the end of 2013. So we were going to move in 2014 to Chicago. But at the same time, I got a call from my buddy, Victor Broden, who's a bass player, actually lives in LA now, but he was living in Nashville. And he was calling me because he wanted a recommendation for a country gig here in Nashville. And I told him, well, I'm actually leaving LA and I'm moving to Chicago, which isn't super far from Nashville. And I would actually be interested in trying out a Nashville touring gig because I hear so many things about the Nashville touring scene. So I actually told him I would do it, and he said, "Okay, you have to send in an audition video and all that stuff." And at that time, I was already kind of just starting getting into the whole YouTube video thing. So I had good cameras. I had a way to record audio. So like my audition video was basically like the best kind of quality you could get from an audition video, I guess. So, anyways, I got the gig and moved to Chicago. Sometime while I was rehearsing in Nashville, it was such a mess that first month of 2014, and I started playing with this band called Thompson Square, it's a country duo, married couple, and yeah, we toured pretty much all of 2014. And the thing about Nashville touring, it feels like a real day job. It's a normal thing, you know. You tour basically, you know, with the exception of 2020, you're basically touring every year. It's you know, you can expect to always have work. You know, there's always summer country festivals and everything. So it feels like a 9 to 5. You show up to bus call on Thursday, you play shows until Sunday or Monday, and you do it over and over again pretty much the whole year until like Thanksgiving. So it was really cool to have that consistency, and also the ability to be home a lot more often than, you know, going out on the road for a month or a month and a half at a time. And then, you know, I like the Nashville touring schedule more than like the pop or the rock touring schedule.
Is that because it's just centrally located and you can just shoot over there for a couple shows, come back and shoot?
Yeah, that's what I was taught was there's so much the touring industry is centered in Nashville because of its location. I want to say Victor told me it was like it's pretty much less than a 10-hour drive to like 75% of the markets in the United States. You know, once you get to around Colorado, that's like a whole nother thing.
Right.
But like, from Nashville, you can get all the way up to like Minnesota. You can go get down to Florida. You can get to New York. You can get to Dallas or whatever within like a day's drive or whatever. So that's why all of the tour bus companies are here. All of the trucking companies are based out of here. A lot of the production lighting is all centrally based in Nashville, and a lot of touring bands will come here, do their rehearsals here, and start their tour out of Nashville. So like they'll fly from LA to come to Nashville, and that's where they'll start. So it's very, you know, it's a very dialed in business here with regards to touring. So, you know, I started with this band in 2014, and I played with them every year pretty much until I think the end of 2018 was my last show. So 5 full years of doing that. And during that time is when I really got into YouTube stuff, because I was kind of juggling YouTube gear demos with touring, and it was great because I had 2 streams of income. And I feel like, you know, my main income was the gig, but the touring or the gear demo YouTube stuff was kind of just like extra spending money for gear or whatever.
Right.
So that eventually got busier. The YouTube stuff got busier, and I got more into it and less into touring towards 2018. I got more into not just the gear demo side of making YouTube videos, but like making up guitar lessons or doing tour vlogs. That's kind of like the one thing that kind of sparked my interest in doing YouTube full time. Was I did one behind the scenes of what it's like being a Nashville touring musician vlog, just because I wanted to try how, you know, an editing technique and all that stuff. And it did really well, and I really enjoyed doing it. So I'm like, I really, you know, enjoy this whole, you know, videography and YouTube and editing and all that stuff. So it kind of, you know, it all worked out because I was getting sick of touring. I was getting sick of traveling and early call times and flying and everything. And I wanted to stay at home more. So the whole YouTube thing was perfect for me to do that because I could still play guitar, but I get to stay at home and I get to be my own boss. I don't have to go to a manager or an artist or whatever.
Work on your own schedule.
Yeah, I've been lazy for the past week. A schedule. I haven't had a schedule, but yeah, it kind of worked out. I never really had the intention of doing it, but I just kind of fell into it, and luckily, it worked out as far as getting more interest from not only viewers but companies that wanted me to do gear reviews, demos, and stuff.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I remember that video that you were talking about, and that tour vlog. That was a great video. You did a great job on that one.
Yeah, thank you. You know what it was? I don't know if you're familiar with Casey Neistat, but he's like a huge YouTuber vlogger. I was getting into like people's vlogs, and I really liked his style of edit because he's a filmmaker, really. So I really liked the way he edited and shot stuff, and I wanted to try that just to see if I could do it. And I learned through doing that video, I learned about, music, background music, shots, slow-mo shots, angles, and all that stuff. So it was more like just a learning project for me.
And now, obviously, I mean, you're dedicated pretty intently on growing this YouTube thing, and you just recently hit a pretty huge milestone, which is amazing. Well deserved.
Thank you. I hit 100,000. I just hung up my plaque. It's over there.
Yeah, I do. It's a beautiful thing. Look at that. Beautiful. Yeah, it's an interesting journey being, on two opposite ends of the YouTube thing. I mean, I had the idea back in 2007, 2008 or so, to start kind of what I'm doing now, which is the YouTube lessons, right? But I saw a couple guys already doing it. I'm like, well, what's the point? There's two guys already doing it on YouTube. And now there's like a million, right? Mm-hmm. But it's an interesting journey for sure, and a very different experience musically, and you get a different sense of fulfillment, I guess, from it. Why don't you talk about your perspective on YouTube and the musical fulfillment that it gives you?
Yeah, I mean, I keep on saying I kind of just fell into it, and I did because I never had any intention of talking on camera. I was very uncomfortable talking into a camera, if you can look at my early videos where the first ones where I started talking, I look really uncomfortable, but it's very common,
Yeah, but it's so awkward. It really is. You're looking literally at a piece of glass, at a lens, if you remember to look at the lens instead of on the monitor. And you're talking and there's nothing feeding back. Like it's not a give and take conversation. So it's yeah, exactly. The dynamic is so strange to carry it one-sided, but yet to come across the screen to your audience, which you do very well, naturally, almost like you're having a conversation with somebody. So you do a great job at that. I'm just trying to figure that out.
Yeah, well, that's what the more you do it, the more you get comfortable, the more you get used to it. But that's something that I've had to learn from doing multiple videos. But when I first started the whole YouTube thing, I just was planning on doing just gear demos. And my whole thing with gear demos is I don't talk in them. I just play the gear. I'll play like a musical piece and then I'll kind of twiddle the knobs and that's it. That's kind of what I was known for. And early on, so my first gear demos were with a Canadian company, Eastwood Guitars. And Michael from Eastwood, I remember early on, he told me that he really liked my videos because I didn't talk. And, there's a lot of international customers that don't speak English. So sometimes it's a turnoff for them to get to a video and someone speaking English or a language that they don't understand, and maybe the subtitles aren't working that great or whatever. So it actually was better for him. He saw sales, internationally go up, with the videos where there's no talking. So that was like, okay, that's cool because I don't like to talk anyways. It's gonna be my thing. And so it's to this day when people ask me to do gear demos, I mean, I've done a couple demos for products where I kind of had to talk to explain some of the features or whatnot. But for the most part, everything is without talking. It's just music. And like I see a lot of comments, and people usually like that instead of a lot of talking. Occasionally I'll get people like, why don't you talk and explain it?
You're always going to get somebody hating on what you do,
Oh,
whether
yeah.
it's good or bad, or, you know.
Yeah. But, it kind of went from the gear demo thing. I think then I started putting out guitar lessons just to get the feelers out, just to see if I could teach something. Because I'm not the greatest teacher. I've taught some private lessons in the past, but I feel like I'm not, the greatest teacher, especially for like beginner guitarists. Because I don't have the mentality to like necessarily break things down.
Yes, it's very different, right? Because we're at a point where things just come naturally. You don't have to think about little nuances of, well, yeah, a beginner would really have to think about the mechanics of how are you attacking the string and where close to the fret and all that.
Well, the term beginner is a loaded term, because it's like, what's a beginner? I mean, a beginner could be someone that's never picked up a guitar, or someone that might know how to play the pentatonic scale. I don't know. So like when I say beginner, I sometimes
it's a range for sure. It's a range there. That's sort of beginner, intermediate, advanced. There's definitely a huge range in each of those categories. But no, you're absolutely right. It's something that it's a difficult thing to do, to teach beginners specifically, but there's a market for teaching more intermediate and more advanced lessons.
Oh yeah. I mean, you could make a channel from anything. There's viewers out there that are going to watch your stuff. So, while I might not be the best channel for someone that's just starting out on guitar, I might have some videos that they might be interested in watching, whether it's something for gear or something regarding the business of music and stuff. So I kind of designed my channel to be more than just gear demos. So I do gear demos, I'll do guitar lessons, I'll do kind of like gear, I say tone tips and tutorials a lot. So, putting together pedal boards, stuff like that. And then like fun kind of vlog stuff. So I kind of try to spread myself around, just so, guitar players of all levels would be interested in the stuff I do.
And the thing that, people need to realize if they're thinking about starting a channel or they're already in a channel is that the guitar community, listen, I'm not subscribed to just one guitar channel. I'm just subscribed to, I can't even countless amount of channels, because everyone's got a different personality, different content, different take on everything. So you're not competing with everybody. You're going to find your own audience within that. And because somebody else has an audience, they're not stealing anyone or anything from you. It's all a part of the same community.
Exactly. And like, you don't even have to be the greatest guitar player to do gear demos. I mean, it's kind of like a running joke between some of my gear demo friends, but there's like some of my gear demo friends that always get like comments from people like, you suck and all this stuff. And like, well, that's kind of my thing. It's like, that's the shtick. It's like, I'm kind of, run-of-the-mill guitar player.
Yeah, everybody can relate to me because everyone's sort of at that level. Not everyone is Tom Quayle with legato or Frank Gambale sweep picking.
I mean, I can imagine some people might be afraid to watch, a video that Tom Quayle does or something, just because like, that's not me. I can't do it. So, it's a lot of people want to see somebody that they can relate to. So
yes, I agree 100%.
Anyone can, like, you could start a channel just about your journey about learning how to play guitar and having never picked up a guitar. And that would be something that other people would watch because they're probably doing the same thing too.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. Yeah. Definitely. Cool. So we've covered a lot of ground. I've kept you for a long time, but I really appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely, man. It's fun talking with you, man.
Yeah. It's great to catch up, and always fun to talk guitar stuff. So that's for sure. So why don't you plug your channel right now so we can expose it to as many people as possible? Because if you haven't checked out RJ's channel, you have to. And any other, maybe your Instagram or whatever other media you're into.
I got to look up what my channel is. Technically, it's youtube.com/RJ Ronquillo, which is my name. And then my Instagram handle is just RJ_Ronquillo. And that's really the only the social networks I'm on,
Well,
active on.
that's all you need right now these days. Those are powerhouses. I'll have a
Yeah.
link, obviously, on the YouTube video of this, and podcast wise, I guess, in the description. But thanks so much for sharing your journey, your trek with us, RJ. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Lawrence. Good to see you.
All right, take care.
All right.